There we go. Okay. Yeah, so tell me a little about yourself.
Just my whole life, I've struggled with, I have kind of narrow shoulders and I have never felt super comfortable while playing. I did land on using I think it's a Zimmer Chinrest a while ago. And I'm trying out the shoulder rest that Shar just made. But I've always been fascinated and teaching many students over the years. Just some of them just don't have freedom, and their posture never quite looks right. And there isn't access, especially I was in Minneapolis until 8 years ago, and there was more access to different chin rests and sponges and stuff. And now that I'm in Michigan, I am just have nothing for my students. I've had a student, what kind of made me, I bought the Chinrest fitting system for the little ones about 3 or 4 years ago. Some students gave me a gift card. And so I bought it and I've used it. Judy Palak, do you know Judy at all?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Judy has fitted my son and fitted a couple of my other students at the Blue Lake Institute, and just have been fascinated by it. And then, so I bought it then, and I've had a couple students get it, but I feel like I've never really fully understood what I was doing, and I'd like to officially understand what I'm doing, and maybe also buy the full-size kit, which what prompted me to contact you is that I have a student who's been experiencing quite a bit of shoulder pain. She said on a scale of 1 to 10, it was at an 8. So, and walking around her body, I could not see anything she was doing wrong. So we made an appointment with Judy. And Judy, same thing. She said, looking at her, I can't see anything, but my best guess is that she's locking her shoulder into place, not lifting it, but just kind of forcing it. Yeah. So she suggested to do the Chinrest fitting, which I found out that Grand Rapids Violins does. So I drove up there and she was fitted, and she just got her Chinrest this week. Gary sent it and he worked on it. And I tell you, her vibrato changed, her tone changed. It was when she tried on the Chinrests at the shop, my jaw dropped. She must have been, and I think she still even, she would probably take her time to get out of some of the habits of whatever she was doing. But vibrato was very hard for her, and now I know why. I look at my students and I think, gosh, I could save you hours of practice if you had the right chin rest.
That's right. Exactly. Yes. Yeah. I mean, what I say probably even on the website is that good fitting equipment takes the nag factor out of teaching. Get your scroll up, get your scroll up, get your scroll up. When really, I mean, usually students are trying reasonably hard, or they just give up. Most people just don't even consider it. So you're very wise in investigating this, and having seen the difference it made, immediate difference that it made in your student. That's worth a lot.
Yeah, and I bought Jennifer Johnson's book too, into a podcast she did, and where she recommended your chin rest.
And I have to tell you the way that I came to this, and I'm like you. I'm small shouldered. My hands are not big. And because I'm small shouldered, therefore my arms are not very long. And so I've probably been playing on a too big instrument all my life, basically. Mm-hmm. And, making do. But then when I was an undergrad, I started having tremendous pains, primarily in my left shoulder. It felt like somebody was stabbing me in the shoulder with a knife. Just shortly after that, I went to study with Paul Rolland. And the very first lesson, Mr. Rolland said, well, do you have any complaints? And I said, yes, it feels like somebody's stabbing me in the shoulder with a knife. And he said, he did this. And he took away my shoulder pad and my chin rest. He said, now go away and play. He did this, go away and play. And I was playing in an opera orchestra at the time. I think we were doing Marriage of Figaro or something like that. And I was doing second violin, so a lot of it was over on the G string, that kind of thing. And that twist of my arm and trying to hang on to my instrument, oh my goodness, it was just death. It just hurt very badly. So I went into the opera orchestra again. I guess we're still rehearsing. And I'm grumbling to myself, this man's crazy. This, I'm not sure I'll stay at the University of Illinois. Blah, blah, blah. It's like, but wait, the pains are going away. Well, maybe I'll go back for another lesson. And so I walked into Mr. Rolland the next week, and he said, okay, report. And I said, well, the pains are going away, but I just feel like I'm going to lose the instrument. He put on a Chinrest. It was, I think we have the model here in the little kit, the Donaldson. And he said, now go away and play for another week. So off I go. And, guys, like, this is really weird. I don't have a shoulder pad. And one of my former teachers, said that you're a hick if you don't have a shoulder pad. So this is all running through my mind. And so I go back into the opera orchestra and doing my noodles over on the G string. And it's like, oh, this is a lot better. And so I went back for the third lesson. He said, okay, report. Now, actually, this is where I said, and this is where I feel like I just need something a little more here. And he gave me a play on air shoulder pad, and that was it. I never had shoulder pains after that. Well, when he fitted me for a Chinrest, he actually walked around to the side of my jaw and looked at my jaw. It's like, okay, there's a little hint. He's looking at the shape of my jaw for deciding what shape of Chinrest is going to work. Okay. And basically, there were two Chinrest models that he used. One was called the Gordon, which has a very long ridge, and the other was the Donaldson, which he gave to me. And coincidentally, the Donaldson was a great fit because I've got this little pointy chin and very much a V-shaped face. And that's basically what the Donaldson has as well. It's got this little hump and a deep trough so that there's relief for the length of my jaw. And so anyway, that was the end of that until there was another lesson, probably the second year I was there. There was a knock on the door, and in walked a luthier from the area, and she had put on a lift underneath the Chinrest. And Mr. Rolland, he was just like, he was delighted. He's like a little kid. Oh, And so he tried to put it on his instrument, but they hadn't figured that if you add height underneath the Chinrest itself, you need taller barrels. Okay. And so when he tried to put it on the instrument, the barrels were not long enough, and the whole thing fell apart. And so he was kind of crestfallen, and he was sitting at his desk. He opened up his desk and shoved the parts in there, and that was the last I ever saw of it. But I saw it. And this is where the idea comes from Paul Rolland. Then you also need to know that Mr. Rolland at that point, and this was 1977, the year before he died, was in the habit of removing everybody's hard shoulder pad when they came to study with him. So at this late point in his life, that's what he was doing. He realized that shoulder pads were complicating one's physical reaction to music making. And the reason for that is that what you see with most kids or most people, players, is that you see this. And then to overstabilize the Chinrest, they tend to do this. And so this is how they stay during their playing lives. And this is why you have so many physical problems. Okay? It's trying to overstabilize the instrument. What Mr. Rolland tried to do with us was to help us realize when we needed to stabilize and when we didn't. Okay. So, and usually the place where you need to stabilize the instrument is in a shift down, and that's where you add light head weight. And when the shift is finished, you can release your head back up on top of the instrument. Okay. So there's a little nod, very light nod, just whatever is needed. Then you release. And then also when you do vibrato, again, same kind of thing. You need a little bit of head weight into the Chinrest, but it's always a question of how much. most of us, unfortunately, feel that we have to have this vice-like grip going on in order to hold the instrument. And that's largely not true unless you have the wrong equipment. Then fast forward many years later, I had students in my former studio in Fairfax, Virginia, who, I couldn't in good conscience tell them they couldn't play without a hard shoulder pad because they had really long necks and they were doing stuff like this. And that's just as bad as anything else. And so Gary Frisch happened to be by the house one day for a teacher's meeting, and he was talking about equipment and what you need to do with your violin, your bow at certain times. And I told Gary afterwards, I said, Gary, I'd really like to do an experiment on lifted Chinrests. And he went, you're on. And so that's how Gary and I got together on that. And so we used my studio as guinea pigs. He would put glue on little strips of wood underneath Chinrests, and we gave them to a bunch of my students. And we very quickly found out that the glue didn't hold. And so they put their head on the Chinrest and thing go snap, and the topper would fall off. The top part of the Chinrest would fall off. So Gary developed a system of gluing and screwing that it stabilized the Chinrest, and that's what you've seen with your student. My students, I fit all of my students for new Chinrests, and it amazed me. It's like, oh my goodness, I was debating telling the student to go study with someone else because I just couldn't solve what was going on. I just felt she was really being resistant, when really it was the equipment. And I'm really ashamed to say that because here it was not her, it was the equipment. Really, it's just a survival skill. Well, you want me to play, I've got to hang on to this thing. And so I'm going to do whatever it takes. And they're not really thinking that. It's just that they feel it getting away. So they start this kind of thing.
Right.
That once you get to, for full-size instrument, once you get to about 90 millimeters in neck height, that's where you need to start considering a lifted Chinrest. 85, even 85. And it in part depends on the shape of your face. Like your face is nice and round, okay? And you have a little bit of breadth to your chin. Your jaw flares open. And so therefore the kind of Chinrest that you will take and the kind of Chinrest that I will take will be two different Chinrests completely. And so you're not only, again, considering neck height, okay, you're also considering the shape of the face. And what we've seen eventually is why that works. And it's a little bit like a shoe. The shoe has to be long enough for the foot. It has to have an arch in the right place. And that's the shape of the Chinrest, the surface of it, and then also the height of the Chinrest. And then another part of that was where the Chinrest is placed in relationship to the tailpiece, that is over the tailpiece or to the left. And actually, we refer to it as half-centered or left placement. Okay. You find that half-centered, for the people who say they need or show that they need an over-the-tailpiece Chinrest, half-centered does it. Very seldom do we run into people who really need it fully centered, or even sometimes to the right.
Okay.
The placement of the instrument is not according to what your teacher does, or what Mr. Suzuki says, or what Paul Rolland says, but it has to do with the length of your finger, your little finger, and the degree of flexibility of your left arm. Okay. And so there's a process that I go through when I'm fitting people that helps me determine what placement they need. Okay. And you should know that this process is on the chinrest.com site.
I did see that. Yeah.
Okay, good. Right. Yeah. And basically what it is if you're standing, you're marching out your feet while you're lifting your knees. That's an important point. You have to lift your knees, because students can just kind of kick their feet out and they're not really doing what's needed. The idea is to get the feet, the legs underneath the hip bones. And when you march and lift your knees, there's no way that you can do that unless your feet are really under your hip bones.
Okay.
Okay. The other thing that I talk about is having soft knees. Mr. Rolland referred to it as marshmallow knees. Okay. And then standing tall over your hip bones. That's something too that's particularly in our modern times, is you don't see it very often because everybody's used to, hunching over the keyboard. And you really do, because you're supporting something up here, you need to have that support underneath. So not giving into and letting it sink you down, but actually a little resistance to it, appropriate resistance. The head should be in line with the middle of the middle of the ear should be in line with the middle of the shoulder. Okay. You can also see whether this is working or not just by looking at the little stretch of skin underneath the jaw. If you're older, it's real easy to see that. I mean, and you can hear the strain in my voice when I do that. Okay, but when the head is up on top of the neck, this neck tissue is going to be soft for older people, and it's not going to be stretched for younger people. Younger people, you'll see just actually right about here, you see the skin stretch. And that means they're reaching forward to overstabilize. Where is the head in relationship to the shoulders? When they position the instrument, what is the head doing? Very often it's tilting to the right because the hard shoulder pad is shoving the head that way. That doesn't solve anything for, and lowering the shoulder rest doesn't solve anything for people who have long necks. So again, hard shoulder pads they encourage dysfunction. I'm also taking a reading on any physical ills that they either have or have had. For instance, I've had people come in that say, oh yeah, I was in a car wreck, not once, but 3 times. And so I already have physical problems from that. Or you'll hear students come in and they say, oh yeah, I fell on the playground and I broke out whatever. And the doctor just said, go away and play, you'll be all right, you're a kid. When really they've carried that injury and that trauma with them through the rest of their life. Also, I'm looking for the length of legs. For a person whose leg is a little longer on the left side, you'll often see that the left shoulder is lower. Okay. Same way, right leg is longer, you see the right shoulder is lower. Also, what can enter into that is what hand they write with. Okay. So a right-handed person, generally speaking, the right shoulder will be lower because they've reached down and forward to write. Okay, and the body remembers that. Okay, and it's a fun game to play. Like if you're out in public, watch people walk by and you can tell which hand they write with just by looking at their shoulders.
So going back to when you had mentioned if one leg's longer than the other, or they're right-handed versus left-handed, how does that affect how you measure for their chin rest?
Well, it doesn't really. It's mostly information. Because if the person has a substantially different shoulder, you'll have to fit them carefully. And then also it's wise to talk them through what they need to be doing physically. Now, sometimes they're very relieved to hear that, oh, it's not just because I'm not talented or because I don't have enough intelligence. It's because there is actually something in my body that is allowing me to do whatever. And I had a person today that I fitted. And I said, do you know that you have one leg longer than another? He said, oh, I know that. My chiropractor tells me that. But it's just, it's mostly information. And also recommending that particularly people who've been injured or people who show, substantial differences, that before they play and after they play, they should be doing some stretching and sometimes some strengthening exercises. One of them is a doorway stretch where you put an arm up and kind of walk through, lean against that arm. And that tends to open up the pecs in here. People who show, I have forward head already, when they're sitting in the car, pushing back against the headrest. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then rest for 5. And do that 10 times. So every stoplight, it's an exercise that you can do. The idea for good equipment is that it's going to encourage your body to be fully human. The shoulder pads encourage you to be partially human. Part statue and part human. Yeah. But the idea is to allow the head to balance out the movements of the bow arm. So you can see as I'm doing this, I'm not trying to move my head, but my body doesn't want me to fall over, and so it goes the other way. Okay, so yeah. So that should be something that you're looking for in the Chinrest, is when they do bowing movements, is the head able to balance out the bow arm? Now, the way that I do that initially is that I ask, once I've fitted them with whatever we're trying Chinrest, is that I ask them to look a little bit left and then just say yes on top of the Chinrest. Mm-hmm. And at the bottom of the yes, that's where they should encounter the Chinrest. If they have to go more than that, the Chinrest is too short. If the nose is kind of up in the air, it's too tall. And what you should see also with the instrument in playing position is that the eyes are also soft. Okay, now what I mean by that is that if it's too tall, you see them trying to look at the top of their instrument, and they have to look down their nose to do it. They don't have the wherewithal, the space to actually tilt the head to look at the instrument. And on the other hand, if they're looking down at the top of the instrument, or their head is tilted down towards the top of the instrument, then you know the Chinrest is too short. Okay, there's nothing noble in having a Chinrest that totally fits your jaw. I mean, totally fits your neck height, because what it does then is that it overstabilizes again, and so that you can't balance things out, and that's where you get this really stiff head kind of look. Pardon me. Well, I won't say who it is. One famous violinist that tends to play like this. Don't say. But yeah, it's because I'll say it. His setup is too tall. Okay, he doesn't have appropriate equipment. I also heard from a bunch of physical therapists one time. Gary and I were at the Performing Arts Medicine Association meeting, and this particular violinist played there. And the physical therapist came running up to me and they said, "What's wrong with him?" It's like, oh. And yeah, they saw it. Okay, from a physical therapist standpoint, they saw that his movements are stiff and yeah, there's something wrong. Yeah, that's how they termed it. So yeah, you're going to be looking for easy movements, and one way to tell again if the Chinrest height is right is by doing this. Just a little yes, and at the bottom of that, that's where the Chinrest should be. Mm-hmm. The other thing that you're going to do when you're fitting a Chinrest is have the player just say no and polish the top of the Chinrest with the bottom of their jaw. And what you're looking at there is the shape of the Chinrest. A Chinrest that is not the correct shape, they'll start feeling like there's something nibbling at their jaw, pinching it, particularly over in this area. They'll also feel like there's maybe not enough relief for their jaw. So basically it should be like a good fitting chair that would fit your backside. It should fit the contour, okay? And so when you put your head down in that, it should be almost like an ergonomic pillow, you might say.
The way the luthier at Grand Rapids Violins said it should be like, I was thinking of yin yang, those two pieces.
Yes, very good. That's right. Yeah. In fact, depending on your jaw shape, there will be more or less of a hump on the chin rest. Mm-hmm. And basically what's happening is exactly that. So if this is the hump, your jaw is coming down here and catching that. Okay, now that's very much exaggerated, but that's what's happening. So when the instrument is prone to get away from you, you add a little light head weight, and that's what catches the instrument. Mm-hmm. Okay. The other thing that a good fitting chin rest will do is that when you add head weight on one end, the other end will go up, and that's called a cantilever effect. Okay. So you press down on one end and the other end goes up. And so that's why you'll hear some players who are astute, they'll say, oh, the instrument feels lighter. Mm. And that's because the shoulder is not, for one, not supporting the instrument out along here. It's supporting it on the collarbone, close to the neck. And then also, if it's a good fitting chin rest, right height, right shape, and you add head weight, the other end of the instrument is automatically going to go up. Okay. Now, will it go up so that if the strings are parallel to the floor? No, it won't. Okay. That's not the job of the chin rest. The chin rest's job is, it's like a security blanket, or again, that hook and eye principle, that when you feel that the instrument is getting away, that's where you add a little head weight. Okay. So again, it's dynamic support of the instrument. The other thing that I wanted to say is, so how is it that you get the strings to be parallel to the floor? Well, it is with a little bit of lift out here. Mr. Rolland's approach to playing, which again came from how the human body works, is that most of the weight is here and the rest of the lift is here. Okay, so it's mostly resting here, and a couple of ounces out here is lifted. This is also a dynamic support. It's the kind of thing that when you're playing in first position, yes, the thumb is going to be holding the instrument, and depending on the length of your thumb and the size of your fingers and so on, that can be here, or a combination, or whenever the music needs it. Yes, and so when you go to third position, on the other hand, then the instrument's going to be resting right along here. Okay. Mm-hmm. And in fact, your thumb can take a vacation then. Okay. Mm-hmm. When you go to fifth position, then it's all along this area. Okay. So the basis of support of the instrument is going to change. But for sure, it's not all head, neck, shoulders. Mm-hmm. So that the left hand is, quote, free. Okay. Mm-hmm. Because basically, again, what you're doing when you do this is that you're implicating movements of the left arm. Okay. You want to be able to allow, dark color is not particularly good, but you want to allow the arm to swivel. So low string, high string. Okay. But with the shoulder pad there, that's going to block that movement. And so that's where you get low string, high string. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So again, we're looking for ergonomics and a human way of moving, okay, based on the situation, which is violin or viola playing. Mm-hmm. So if I were fitting someone, I'd take out my measuring tape. And I've got mine on the millimeter side. I mean, you can do it inches if you want, and Gary will convert it. But yeah, and then I find a place where, at least for people who've played for a little while, there's going to be a little rough place there. It's just in front of something called the antagonal notch. If you rub along your jaw from the corner of it down just a little bit, there's going to be a little divot in there. That's called the antagonal notch. Okay. Gonial, I think, means angle, and anti means before. Yeah, so now she's like, oh, where is that? Yeah, but if you rub along there, Yeah, there's mine right there. Just
That's
a,
one.
yeah. And again, I'm not truly, I don't feel a client's jaw to find what it is. I'm just basically looking where the instrument is placed. And I put the edge of the tape measure there and measure down to the top. Whoops, I got the wrong head angle here. To the top of the collarbone.
Does that look about right?
Yeah, maybe, yeah. And just so it's, not sliding up your jaw, it's actually under the jawbone. Oh, okay. Yeah, so you have a rough place there. So right about where the rough place is, and then down to the top. It's wise to have, yeah, it looks about right. And so what is your reading?
I'll do it again just in case because I was quick.
Yeah, and I'm seeing you do a little bit of this.
Let's see.
And that's why it's best to have. Oh, and then the way that you can get them to have an equal head is to have them look in a mirror.
Okay.
Walk up and look in the mirror, and then the head will be where it normally is. You can also have them do, yes. Now find the middle of that.
It would be 95.
95, okay, yeah. And that's probably for sure you'd want to think about a lifted chin rest. That's for 3/4 or full-size instruments. And again, it depends. For instance, my neck is 90 millimeters, but you see that my jaw juts down into that neck length. And so that's why I don't need a lifted chin rest. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you most likely would because you don't have a lot of territory that juts down into your neck height.
Also, I think the thing that I have a good eye for is jaw shape and type. Mm-hmm. And so when I was reading your articles and there's the angles, I don't quite get it.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any tricks or.
Yeah, I'm not sure how important that is because as you go through the various chin rests, the jaw is going to tell you what works. It's a little like having a good fitting glove. If the glove is broad enough, it's going to get over, a little broad hand like this. If the pinky finger is too long, you can kind of fold it over. And it's the same thing with the chin rest. If you have a I tend to see jaws in terms of letters. So my face is very V-shaped. And if you put my fingers here, and you see that the jaw starts here and it just dives down completely. Whereas some people, the jaw will come down this way and then go out, okay? Sure. And your jaw, I think, is one of those. That this bone right here, I forget what it's called, it goes down fairly long, and then your jaw opens fairly widely, and then you have a very rounded face. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's how that appears. You also have some breadth to your chin, and you can see what's going on with the chin just by looking at the person from the side. You see how my chin pokes out and down. That's interesting. That tiny little chin is going to need a tiny little bump. Okay, so this is the Donaldson. That's what I use, and you see that because my jaw angles down quite a bit, I'm going to need a lot of scoop. Okay, and it's just a guess. And again, I let the process show me for sure. But someone like you, this is called a turner, and you see that the scoop is not nearly the same.
So this is my current chin rest.
Yes. Mm-hmm. yeah. And the other one that I was going to show you was this one. Yeah. So that because your jaw is broader, it opens wider, and you have this nice curve right here. You're going to need less valley there, and potentially less hill.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you look at this one, this is the Donaldson again. If you look at it from this side, you see that, wow, it's got quite a ski slope here. And yeah, there you can see. Sure, yeah. But ultimately, sometimes I'm surprised. Sometimes someone will walk in and they have a face like, say, like yours, and they end up with a Donaldson. It's like, okay, the customer in that regard is always right. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. If they show that their head is nicely on top of their spine and they have some good movements left and right, if the instrument is not squirting away when they put head weight down, then I know that I've helped them find the right height and the right shape. And then that's something else. If a chin rest is too tall, you're going to hear and see one of two things. When the person puts head weight down, the instrument will slide over the collarbone. It'll actually take a dive over the collarbone. Okay, so it's kind of that. That in truth can also be due to the fact that the person is used to having forward head when they put the jaw down on the chin rest. Because as soon as you do that, you are shoving the instrument away from yourself. Okay, so you just have to watch. When they put the head down, it should be with just a little yes and just a little slight tug towards the chin towards the neck. Okay, so not this approach, but this. Gary refers to it as backwards pigeon. Okay, so a pigeon would do this. You know how a pigeon walks. Okay, what you need to be is the backward pigeon. Okay, yeah. Another colleague, Abby Albaugh, talks about turtling. So you know how a turtle will stick its head out. Okay, that's what you don't want to do when you play. You don't want to do turtling. Yeah, you want to be the turtle that, you know, the skin is all kind of stacked up here for older people at least. Yeah, so one of the things that if it's too tall, it's going to hop across the collarbone. You'll also see daylight between the neck and the instrument. Okay. And very frankly, sometimes height is correct and still there's a little bit of light. So I'm not exactly sure what that is, but you know, you're trying to get it as right as you possibly can. Let's see. The other thing that they'll say is that they feel a lot of pressure on their collarbone. It feels like somebody's standing in stilettos on the collarbone. That's a sure sign that the setup is too high. You can see that I'm having trouble getting settled. I have to turn my head quite a bit before I'm settled, and that's what we don't want in the chin rest. This particular chin rest, that's too dark, yeah. But you can see that there's, only if I did that, yeah. And that says something too about, okay, for this particular jaw, it would really need to be a kind of broad jaw, a little bit like you have. Once they put their head on the chin rest, it should just be normal head, looking left a little bit, this, and then see what they do. If they start doing this, they're trying to find the comfortable place, the secure place on the chin rest. And that's not what you want to do. The chin rest should be naturally comfortable for the person without contortions. Yeah, so I think those are the things that I'm looking for. And am I telling people these things as we do the fitting? Usually not. It's just kind of, I'm eyeing out what's going on. It's having a sense for right angles. So the head, neck, and shoulders should form right angles. If they don't, then it's probably one leg is longer than the other, or it could be right-handed, left-handed kind of things. Occasionally what will happen is that you have somebody with a little bit of curvature of the spine. And all of those things, there's nothing really that you can do about it except to say, well, if the longer leg is bothering you, put a little bit of a lift in the other shoe, and that will tend to even out the shoulders. Usually by the time people come to me, their body is so used to being, you know, a little different that it's like, no, that just feels too weird. I'd say that those are some of the rubrics that I use to see what's happening. And then it's a matter of trying different chin rests getting a little bit, or getting a reading from them. What do you feel? Do you feel anything poking at your jaw? It's okay to feel a presence in this soft area of your jaw, but you just don't want it along the bone. The principles are the same, that the head needs to be on top of the neck, that the shoulders need to be released, that you want to see a little bit of bobbing back and forth. It's like those bobble heads and they used to put in cars. You see this. With children, very often they're scared of you. It's this new person standing there talking to them. And what you do is watch their eyes. If you see the eyes go like this, it's like, okay, that's not fitting. But sometimes what you see is, it's just the reaction. It's like, oh, I didn't know it could feel, didn't know I didn't have to be in pain when I play. Yeah. The fractional sizes, as a matter of course, I do take neck measurements. And that's mostly because I want to keep a chart of how the child is growing. There are only 3 models for the little kit. You have the Brandt, the Hamburg, and the
Tekka or Tika.
That's right, Tekka. Right, exactly, right. And those are naturally higher one than another. But again, most of what you're going to be looking at first is how the jaw reacts to the shape.
So when my student was fitted, it has a 3/4 instrument, but we got her a full-size Chinrest. And what he did is he started by putting a lift on and then put on the different toppers.
And that's fine. I do that as well.
Okay.
If people come in and they have an 85 or 90 millimeter neck, I'm still going to fit them with a lift. And I can expect to hear that, this is digging into my collarbone, or I see it taking a dive over their collarbone. And I say, let's see if we can get the shape pretty close, and then we'll go to a non-lifted chin rest.
How often would you say, or you'd have to change chin rests over the years? Is it every time they get a new instrument, or about the parents who say, well, I have to buy a new chin rest every time, and which I think there's a valid point for saying that you should do that. Sure. If you want your kid to be comfortable, but yeah, absolutely.
And part of what we're doing, it's a little like a sport. Well, as the child grows, you're going to have to buy the longer hockey stick and the longer shoes, or the skates. Same thing with a violin. You want to have the right equipment, because you can imagine somebody having skates that are too small for their feet, or a hockey stick that is too short. It goes hand in hand. And basically what you'll begin to see when the chin rest gets too short is this. Okay, because the neck is getting longer and the jaw has farther down to go. Also, you can pretty much look at a student's pants and know that they've grown.
Do they ever change which topper they use over the years, or does that pretty stay consistent?
No, we added 1 new chin rest to the lineup. Okay. And so when my students were refitted, I would throw that into the mix, and some of them did like it better. So that's, but generally the shape of your jaw is the shape of the jaw that you're born with. Yeah. What does change, of course, is the overall size of the jaw and the neck height. You're born with no neck. But yeah, the neck is going to really show.
Okay. So going to fractional sizes, you start with the topper first.
Yeah, I do. Well, and that's because the little kits don't come with lifts. They come just as, fully built chin rests. And I'll try one of those. The 3/4 chin rest isn't necessarily for a 3/4 instrument.
Okay.
you could have a person that's fairly big-headed, large head, that might need a 3/4 on the smaller instrument.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, we sometimes have full-size players who the 3/4 size Chinrest fits them better than a full size. So that's why it's good to have these on hand. Gary will tell you that the smaller Chinrest sizes will not fit past a certain point the taller, the larger instruments. Okay. Also, I'm sure you're well aware of this, but a child's head in proportion to his body is much larger. Okay. So that a 1/16 size Chinrest might be inappropriate for a person who is playing a 1/16 instrument. They might need a 1/4 or half size.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And that's just something to kind of keep track of as well. If the jaw completely engulfs the Chinrest, it's like, okay, well, I'll try something a little bit bigger. Mm-hmm. Once we decide on a shape, then I'll start fine-tuning height. And that's where your shims will come in.
Yeah. Okay.
So you take the little piece of cork that has wood on the top, I think. Yes, it does. And then slide that underneath the Chinrest so that you can build it up a little bit. Mm-hmm. Yeah, right, exactly. And then also you should know that you can make your own shims. Okay. If you have like a gift box, the very narrow cardboard, you can do 3 or 4 millimeters, and it really works pretty well. Okay. Yeah, I've sometimes given away my shims to students and I don't get them back. And so that's how I replace them, is just with cardboard box. And I trace over the bottom of the cork here and then cut out shapes that are appropriate. So,
okay.
Yeah.
That doesn't hurt the violin at all, the cardboard?
No, not at all. No. I've sometimes used business cards so that I want to fine tune height a little bit. And business cards tend to be about 1 millimeter as well, thickness. That's another possibility. Another adult student took Post-its and would tear off little strips of those and put them on the bottom of her Chinrest so that she could fine-tune height. And again, these are not meant to be permanent kinds of things because they're not stable. Mm-hmm. So it's just mostly for the diagnosis.
Do you use the little red disc when you're doing the fittings?
I do, yes. Mm-hmm. That's what I give my students when they say, but I have to have a shoulder pad. Okay, use this. And usually there aren't any complaints. As far as the public school teachers are concerned, they pretty much know when they see that red disc, they shouldn't say anything because that student is my student. And also they're very, if you're studying with someone and this is what they want, this is what I want you to do. So they're very gracious in that way. One person that you might want to visit with is Barbara Greenberg.
Okay.
Barbara is a Suzuki teacher as well, who also does fittings. Okay. And has, I think, all of the kits. But she has a particular philosophy with younger children, and that is that the kids have to be comfortable or it just doesn't work. Mm-hmm. Okay? They have to feel secure or it just doesn't work. Now, she will say, for that reason, she gives them one of the harder foam shoulder pads to kind of build them up underneath. And she said, this is a starting point. This is something that we start with. And as they get older, we go with less and less. But for little kids who don't have a lot of core strength and they're dealing with this big thing on the top of their body, she maintains that it's important to have some kind of padding underneath.
I do teach some viola, and
good.
That's where I hadn't until I moved here. And just curious, do you do anything differently than with violists?
Not really. I mean, sometimes I find myself saying, your instrument is too big for you. And they don't want to hear that because they think that they equate a big sound with a big instrument. Mm-hmm. And that might be, but if you're playing on an instrument that is oversized, you're begging to hurt yourself. And it takes more out of you. So finding a smaller instrument that suits you is really, really important. So it does. I mean, as soon as you reach your arms out at a certain point, you can see that the head goes too. So yeah, that and I know that Suzuki teachers are very good about looking for that 90-degree angle here in first position. That's really important. It really is. And you're very wise not to give instruments that are too big for students. Better a little on the small side. Violists will sometimes come to me and say, I want a Chinrest that's over the tailpiece because that's what so-and-so says. And I usually say, well, do you wear so-and-so's shoes? Yeah, and the other thing you need to know is that with full-size instruments, you have to have a 95 millimeter neck in order to get over the tailpiece. Okay, so if you put a Chinrest over the tailpiece, you have to have automatically a taller neck.
Interesting.
Yes. And so if you have a violist who comes in and says, I want something over the tailpiece, and their neck is about 85 millimeters, it's like, no. And even if they show the tendency of needing a half-centered chin rest, it's better to go with what's good for the head.
Yes.
Okay? Because if the head is happy, the rest of the body's happy. It's like, where the head of the horse goes, the body goes. It's the same thing with players. That if your head is happy, the rest of the body will be happy. There's no need to keep the head in one place. That's a fallacy. The head shouldn't. I mean, some also say your head needs to be straight forward. Well, yeah, most of the time. But if you want to look right or you want to look left or you do something like that, your head is going to want to balance those movements out. The idea is not to have the head stationary and still. It should do what it needs to do based on what the bow hand is doing.
That's very helpful. Yeah. Makes me want to take every student and do it. And I know that's what you said, what you did do.
That's what I did. Yep. That's part of the lesson, right? Because I know that my job will be easier in teaching them, and that their job learning will be easier because they really are who they are physically. And I tell my students, you're going to look different, but you're going to be healthier. You're going to play longer. You're going to play with more joy.